The lights in Murphy's bar were dim and yellow, casting long shadows across the metal floor. The air smelled of cheap alcohol and engine oil, a mixture that had become as familiar as home to the regular customers. Kepler Station was far from Earth, sitting on the edge of human space where traders, miners, and freight runners stopped to rest and do business. Jake Murphy wiped down a glass behind the bar, his eyes moving slowly across the room. He had seen everything in his 20 years running this place. Fights over money, fights over women, fights over nothing at all. But tonight felt different. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. At a table near the window, Lisa Carter and Tony Rodriguez sat with their drinks. Lisa was a cargo pilot, small and tough with short brown hair and hands that showed the wear of working on ships. Tony was her partner in their small freight business, a stocky man with dark hair and a quick smile. They had been hauling goods between stations for 5 years now, and Jake knew them well. The two humans were not alone in the bar. Near the back wall, 3 Zephyrians sat in a circle, their crystal-like bodies catching the light. They looked like living glass sculptures, beautiful and strange. Their voices made soft chiming sounds when they talked to each other in their own language. They were merchants, always polite and always looking for good deals. At another table, 4 Corvins played cards. They were tall and thick, with scales that looked like natural armor. Their yellow eyes were sharp and cold, and they moved with the careful grace of natural predators. The Corvins were traders too, but they were also warriors. Everyone knew that about them. In the corner booth, 2 Thaxians sat quietly, watching everything with their large black eyes. They were thin and pale blue, with 4 arms each and faces that showed no emotion. The Thaxians were diplomats, always studying other species and taking notes. They thought they were smarter than everyone else. Jake Murphy had seen all these species before. They came to his bar because it was neutral ground. No weapons allowed, no fighting allowed, and everyone paid their bills. It was simple, and it worked. Most of the time, Lisa Carter took a drink from her beer and looked at the datapad in front of her. She was reviewing shipping contracts, trying to figure out which jobs would pay the best. Tony was doing the same, but he kept looking around the room. He could feel the tension, too. The Zephyrians were talking about rare metals from the outer rim. Their chiming voices carried across the room, and Jake could understand some of their trade language. They were excited about something, probably a big deal that would make them rich. The Corvins were louder. They spoke in their own harsh language, but sometimes they used common tongue so everyone could hear. Jake knew they liked to show off, especially when there were other species around to impress. The Thaxians said nothing. They just watched and listened, their 4 hands moving slowly as they took notes on small devices. Jake had always wondered what they wrote about, but he had never asked. Tonight there were also other humans in the bar. Pete Walker sat alone at the bar, drinking coffee and reading reports. He was an accountant, thin and quiet, with glasses that made his eyes look bigger. He handled money for some of the trading companies and never caused trouble. Danny Moore was cleaning tables, earning some extra money while his ship was being repaired. He was only 19, with blonde hair and a friendly face. He worked hard, and always had a joke ready. Jake liked the kid. Carol Stevens was visiting the station with her daughter's family. She was a grandmother from Earth, with gray hair and kind eyes. She had come to the bar for a quiet drink while her family slept. Jake had been surprised to see her, but she said she liked the quiet atmosphere. The other customers were mostly aliens Jake did not know well. Some single Zephyrians, a few Corvins, and 1 Thaxian who sat alone in the far corner. They all seemed to be waiting for something, though Jake could not tell what. Lisa Carter finished reading her contracts and looked up at Tony. "The Corvin job pays well, but I do not like dealing with them," she said quietly. Tony nodded. "They always try to change the deal after we start, but we need the money." "I know," Lisa said. "I just wish they were more honest." At the Corvin table, one of the large aliens looked over at them. His name was Star, and Jake had seen him before. He was bigger than the other Corvins, with darker scales and scars on his face. He was also louder and ruder than most of his kind. Star said something to his friends in their language. And they all laughed. The sound was like rocks grinding together, harsh and unpleasant. He pointed at Lisa and Tony, still laughing. Lisa noticed and frowned. "What is he looking at?" she asked. Tony turned to look, and Star waved at him with mock friendliness. "Human," the Corvan called out in common tongue. "You want to make deal, yes?" "Maybe," Tony said carefully. "What kind of deal?" Star stood up and walked over to their table. He was almost 7 feet tall, and his presence made the small table seem even smaller. "You haul cargo, yes? I have cargo." "You take cargo? I pay good money." Lisa looked at the datapad. "We already have your company's offer here. The terms are acceptable." Good, Star said, pulling up a chair without being invited. "But I think maybe we change terms a little bit. Make better deal for everyone." Tony and Lisa exchanged glances. This was exactly what they had been worried about. "The terms are already set," Tony said. "We agreed to the contract price?" Star laughed, showing teeth that looked like they could bite through metal. "Contract price is for contract work. But this cargo, it is special. Needs special handling. Needs special people." "What kind of special handling?" Lisa asked. "Nothing. Difficult," Star said with a grin that did not reach his eyes. "Just need people who know how to keep quiet. How to not ask questions. How to do what they are told." The bar had gotten quieter. Jake noticed that the other aliens were listening. Now, though they were trying to look like they were not. Pete Walker had stopped reading his reports. Danny Moore had stopped cleaning tables. Even Carol Stevens was paying attention from her seat at the bar. "We are not interested in that kind of work," Lisa said firmly. "We haul legal cargo only." Star's grin got wider. "Legal, illegal, what is difference? Cargo is cargo. Money is money." "The difference is important to us," Tony said. "Find someone else." The Corvan's expression changed. His yellow eyes got colder, and his voice dropped to a growl. "You think you are too good for Corvan money? You think human honor is worth more than profit?" "We think our reputation is worth more than one job," Lisa said. Star leaned forward, his large hands flat on the table. "Reputation means nothing in space, little human. Space is big and dark, and accidents happen all the time." The threat was clear, and the atmosphere in the bar changed instantly. Jake Murphy reached under the bar where he kept his emergency communicator. The Zephyrians stopped their chiming conversation. The Faxians looked up from their notes, but it was the humans who reacted most strongly. Pete Walker's hands tightened. On his coffee cup, Danny Moore set down his cleaning rag and moved closer to the confrontation. Carol Stevens turned on her bar stool to face the table. Tony Rodriguez felt something shift inside him, something old and deep that he usually kept locked away. "I think you should go back to your table," he said quietly. Star laughed again. But this time it sounded forced. "Or what, little human? What will you do?" Lisa Carter stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. "We will ask you to leave us alone, politely." "And if I do not want to leave you alone?" Star asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Jake Murphy started to move from behind the bar, but he was too far away. The other aliens watched with interest, expecting the humans to back down as they always did when faced with superior physical strength. They had no idea what was about to happen. The silence in Murphy's bar stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Star looked down at Lisa Carter and Tony Rodriguez with his cold yellow eyes, waiting for them to show fear. In his experience, humans always back down when faced with real danger. They were weak creatures who hid behind laws and contracts and rules. "I am waiting for answer," Star said, his voice like gravel. "What will you do if I do not leave you alone?" Tony Rodriguez felt his heart beating faster. He could smell the Corvan's breath, which reminded him of rotting meat. He could see the scars on the alien's face and hands, proof that this creature had hurt others before. Every logical part of his mind told him to apologize, to back down, to find a peaceful solution, but there was another part of his mind, older and deeper, that was telling him something different. It was the same part that had helped his ancestors survive on Earth for thousands of years before they ever dreamed of space travel. It was the part that said some things were worth fighting for. We will ask you nicely one more time, Tony said quietly. Please go back to your table. Star threw back his head and laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Or what? You will call station security? You will file complaint? You will cry? The other Corvans at their table were watching now, grinning with anticipation. They had seen this many times before. Their friend would intimidate the weak humans until they gave in to whatever he wanted. It was entertainment for them. The Zephyrians were clicking softly to each other, their crystal bodies flashing with nervous light. In their society, conflicts were handled through proper channels. There were forms to fill out, committees to consult, procedures to follow. They could not understand why the humans did not just agree to avoid trouble. The Thaxians were taking notes faster now, their four hands moving across their small devices. This was exactly the kind of behavior they expected from humans. Emotional reactions, poor decision-making, inability to think clearly under pressure. They were documenting another example of human inferiority. Lisa Carter stood perfectly still, but her muscles were tight like springs ready to release. She had grown up in the shipping districts of Mars Colony where you learned to fight or you did not survive. She had not used those skills in years, but they were still there, waiting. You know what I think? Star said, leaning closer to Lisa. I think human females make good servants. Quiet, obedient, easy to train. The words hit Lisa like a physical blow. She felt her face get hot with anger, but she kept her voice steady. You need to leave, now. Star reached out with one large, clawed hand and deliberately knocked over Lisa's beer. The liquid splashed across the table and onto her clothes, soaking her shirt and pants. Oops, he said with mock concern. Accident. Tony Rodriguez moved before he even realized he was moving. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward with a crash. That was not an accident. You are right, Star said with an evil grin. It was not accident? What are you going to do about it? Jake Murphy was pushing through the crowd now, trying to reach the confrontation before it exploded. But Murphy's bar was packed tonight, and there were too many bodies between him and the trouble. Hey, he shouted. Take it easy over there. But it was too late for taking it easy. Star grabbed Lisa by the shoulder with his big hand, his claws, digging into her shirt. Maybe you learn some manners, human female. Maybe you learn to show respect to your betters. That was when something inside Tony Rodriguez snapped like a breaking wire. The civilized part of his mind, the part that believed in laws and negotiations and peaceful solutions, simply shut off. What took its place was something much older, something that had been sleeping in human DNA for thousands of years. Tony grabbed his empty beer bottle by the neck and smashed it against the edge of the table. Glass exploded everywhere, leaving him holding a jagged weapon. Without hesitation, without fear, without even thinking, he drove the broken bottle towards Star's face. The Corvan was fast, but he had not expected the attack. He jerked his head back and the glass scraped across his cheek, drawing bright green blood. He roared in pain and surprise, letting go of Lisa to grab his wounded face. Impossible, whispered one of the Thaxians. Humans do not attack superior opponents, but Tony Rodriguez was not finished. While Star was distracted by his wound, Tony grabbed his fallen chair and swung it like a club. The metal chair hit the Corvan in the ribs with a sound like thunder. Star stumbled backward. More surprised than hurt, the other Corvans at the card table jumped to their feet, knocking over chairs and spilling drinks. They had expected to watch their friend humiliate some weak humans. They had not expected a fight. One of them, a smaller Corvan with bright red scales, moved toward the confrontation. But Lisa Carter was ready for him. She picked up her heavy metal mug and threw it as hard as she could. It hit the red Corvan in the face, breaking his nose with a wet crunch. Green blood splattered across the floor. The aliens in the bar stared in shock. They were seeing something they had never imagined possible. Humans, the weak and peaceful species, were fighting like wild animals. And they were not losing. Pete Walker, the quiet accountant, was sitting at the bar when the red Corvan stumbled backward from Lisa's attack. The alien crashed into Pete's stool, knocking him to the floor. Pete's glasses flew off his face and shattered on the ground. For a moment, Pete just lay there, blinking in confusion. He was not a fighter. He was a numbers man, a desk worker, someone who solved problems with computers and calculators. But when he saw the Corvin reaching down to grab him, something changed in Pete's mind. He rolled away from the alien's grasping claws and came up holding a broken piece of his beer mug. Without thinking, without planning, Pete drove the sharp glass into the Corvin's leg. The alien screamed and fell to one knee. Danny Moore, the young freight handler, was supposed to be cleaning tables. But when he saw Pete Walker, a man old enough to be his father, fighting for his life on the floor, Danny felt something wake up inside him. It was like a switch being turned on, flooding his body with strength and speed he did not know he had. Danny grabbed a bottle from behind the bar and brought it down on the wounded Corvin's head. The bottle did not break, but the sound it made was like a hammer hitting meat. The alien collapsed, unconscious. Carol Stevens, the grandmother from Earth, was sitting at the bar when the fighting started. She should have been scared. She should have hidden or called for help or tried to escape. Instead, she picked up her purse, which was made of heavy leather and had metal clasps, and looked around for someone to hit with it. The Zephyrians were pressed against the back wall, their crystal bodies flashing with fear and confusion. They could not understand what they were seeing. Humans were supposed to be logical creatures who avoided violence. They were supposed to use words in negotiations and legal procedures to solve problems. The Thaxians were no longer taking notes. They were staring with their big black eyes at the impossible scene in front of them. Their careful studies of human behavior had never prepared them for this. Scar recovered from Tony's chair attack and charged forward with a roar of rage. He was bigger and stronger than the human, with natural armor and claws that could tear through metal. He should have been able to crush Tony Rodriguez like an insect, but Tony Rodriguez was not fighting like a civilized being anymore. He was fighting like something wild that had been pretending to be tame. When Scar grabbed for him, Tony ducked low and drove his shoulder into the alien's stomach. When Scar tried to claw his back, Tony spun around and raked the broken bottle across the Corvin's arm. Lisa Carter was fighting the third Corvin, a female with orange scales and scars across her face. The alien was faster than Sketar, but Lisa was fighting with a fury that surprised everyone, including herself. She used a broken chair leg like a club, striking again and again at the Corvin's head and shoulders. The bar was chaos now. Furniture was being thrown and broken. Aliens were bleeding and humans were shouting. Glass was everywhere, crunching under boots and bare feet, but the most shocking thing was not the violence itself. It was the way the humans were coordinating without speaking, helping each other without planning, fighting together like they had trained for this moment their entire lives. Jake Murphy finally reached the center of the fight, but instead of trying to stop it, he picked up a bottle and looked around for an alien to hit. The creatures that the aliens had dismissed as weak and harmless were tearing Murphy's bar apart with their bare hands, and they were winning. The fighting spread through Murphy's bar like wildfire. What had started as a disagreement between two humans and one Corvin had become something much bigger and more dangerous. The sound of breaking glass and alien screams filled the air, mixing with human shouts and the crash of falling furniture. Star was bleeding from 3 different wounds, but he was still fighting. His yellow eyes were wild with rage and confusion. In all his years of bullying weaker species, he had never met anything like Tony Rodriguez. The human was smaller and weaker, but he fought like a creature possessed by demons. Tony had cuts on his arms and face, but he did not seem to notice the pain. He moved around Star like a dancer, always staying just out of reach of the Corvin's claws. When the alien swung at him, Tony would duck and strike back with whatever weapon he could find, a broken bottle, a piece of metal, even his bare fists. "This is impossible," Star growled as he missed another grab at the human. "You should be dead by now." Tony did not answer. He was beyond words now, running on pure instinct. He grabbed a metal serving tray from a nearby table and swung it like a shield, blocking Star's claws. Then he spun the tray around and smashed it into the side of the Corvin's head. Lisa Carter was having her own battle with the orange-scaled female Corvan. The alien was faster than her male companions, but Lisa was learning as she fought. Every move the Corvan made, Lisa found a way to counter it. When the alien tried to grab her, Lisa would twist away and strike back. When the Corvan tried to claw her, Lisa would block with whatever she could find. The female Corvan made a mistake. She lunged forward too far, trying to tackle Lisa to the ground. Lisa stepped aside at the last second and brought her knee up hard. The impact sent the alien crashing into a table, which collapsed under her weight. Pete Walker was fighting the red-scaled Corvan near the bar. The alien was bigger and stronger, but Pete had something the Corvan did not expect. Pete was angry. Really, truly angry for the first time in his quiet, peaceful life. The Corvan swung his clawed hand at Pete's head, but Pete ducked and grabbed a heavy bottle from behind the bar. He swung it with all his strength, and it connected with the alien's jaw with a sound like breaking wood. The Corvan staggered backward, green blood flowing from his mouth. "You want to fight humans?" Pete shouted, surprising himself with the fury in his voice. "Let me show you what humans can do." Danny Moore was helping Carol Stevens fight off two smaller aliens who had tried to escape the chaos. One was a Zephyrian merchant who had gotten too close to the fighting. The other was a lone Faxian who had made the mistake of trying to push past Carol to reach the door. Carol Stevens, the grandmother from Earth, was fighting with her heavy purse and a broken chair leg. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had raised 5 children and knew how to handle trouble. When the Zephyrian tried to push her aside, Carol hit him with her purse so hard that his crystal body cracked. "In my day, aliens had better manners," Carol said calmly as she blocked the Faxian's forearms with her chair leg. Danny Moore was using a metal tray to fight the Faxian. The alien was trying to use all 4 of his arms to grab the young human, but Danny was too quick. He spun around the alien like he was dancing, hitting him with the tray every time he got close. Jake Murphy had finally joined the fight, and he was making up for lost time. He grabbed a heavy bottle from behind his bar and waded into the chaos like a man half his age. When a Corvan tried to grab Lisa from behind, Jake hit him in the back of the head with the bottle. When another alien tried to escape through the kitchen, Jake blocked his path and hit him again. "This is my bar," Jake shouted as he fought. "You want to cause trouble in my bar? I will show you trouble." The aliens who were still conscious and able to fight were beginning to panic. Nothing in their experience had prepared them for this. Humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to be afraid of violence. They were supposed to back down when faced with superior opponents, but these humans were not backing down. If anything, they seemed to be getting stronger and more dangerous as the fight went on. They were working together without talking, helping each other without being asked, fighting like they had trained for this moment their entire lives. The Zephyrian merchants were pressed against the back wall, their crystal bodies flashing with terror. They had never seen anything like this violence. In their society, conflicts were resolved through careful negotiation and legal procedures. Physical violence was almost unknown. "This cannot be happening," one of them chimed to his companions. "Humans do not behave this way. They are peaceful traders, not warriors." But the evidence was right in front of them. The peaceful traders were destroying the bar and everyone in it. The Faxian diplomats were no longer taking notes. They were staring in shock at the scene before them. All their careful studies of human behavior, all their psychological profiles and cultural analyses, were proving to be completely wrong. "We must revise our reports," one Faxian whispered to another. "Everything we know about humans is incorrect." "How is this possible?" the other replied. "Our intelligence services studied them for years. They showed no signs of this capacity for violence." They watched as Carol Stevens, a 65-year-old human grandmother, calmly broke a chair over the head of a Corvan warrior who was 3 times her size. The alien collapsed like a falling tree. Star was getting desperate. His wounds were slowing him down, and Tony Rodriguez showed no signs of getting tired. The human seemed to have unlimited energy for fighting. Every time Star thought he had the advantage, Tony would find a new weapon or a new way to attack. "Why will you not die?" Star roared as he swung his claws at Tony's head. Tony ducked under the attack and grabbed a broken table leg. He drove it into Scar's stomach like a spear, and the Corvan doubled over in pain. Then Tony brought his knee up and connected with Scar's face. The alien's head snapped back and he fell to the floor, but Tony was not finished. He picked up a heavy metal chair and raised it over his head, ready to bring it down on the fallen Corvan. His face was covered in blood and sweat, and his eyes had a wild look that made even the other humans step back. Lisa Carter grabbed Tony's arm before he could strike. "He is down," she said quietly. "It is over." Tony looked at her for a moment, the chair still raised above his head. Slowly, the wild look faded from his eyes, and he lowered the chair. He was breathing hard, and his hands were shaking around them. The bar was quiet except for the groans of wounded aliens and the sound of broken glass crunching under feet. The fight was over, but the damage was done. Tables and chairs were broken. Bottles and glasses were smashed. Green and blue alien blood was splattered across the walls and floor. Pete Walker was sitting on the floor, his shirt torn and his face bleeding. But he was smiling. He had never felt anything like the rush of energy that had filled him during the fight. He felt alive in a way he had never experienced before. Danny Moore was helping Carol Stevens to a chair. The grandmother was breathing hard, but she looked pleased with herself. Her gray hair was messy and her clothes were torn, but her eyes were bright with satisfaction. "That was quite exciting," she said to Danny. "I have not had that much fun in years." Jake Murphy was looking around his destroyed bar with a mixture of pride and dismay. The damage would cost him a fortune to repair, but he had to admit that he felt good about what had happened. The aliens had learned an important lesson tonight. The surviving aliens were huddled in corners, staring at the humans with new eyes. The Corvans, who had always thought of themselves as the ultimate warriors, were looking at their wounded companions with disbelief. The Zephyrians were flashing with confused colors, trying to process what they had witnessed. The Faxions were whispering to each other in their own language. Their previous confidence completely shattered. Scar was unconscious on the floor, his breathing shallow and his body covered in wounds. The other Corvans made no move to help him. They were too shocked by what they had seen in the distance. The sound of approaching footsteps could be heard in the corridor outside. Station security was coming, drawn by the noise and the emergency alerts that had been triggered by the fight, but the real damage had already been done. The aliens in Murphy's bar had seen something that would change their understanding of humanity. Forever, they had seen what humans were really capable of when pushed too far. The peaceful, weak species they had dismissed as harmless traitors had just torn apart a room, full of supposedly superior aliens with nothing but improvised weapons. And raw determination. And the most terrifying part was that the humans had enjoyed it. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the corridors outside Murphy's bar. Station security was coming, and they were coming fast. The emergency alarms had been triggered when the fighting started, sending automatic alerts to the security office. Now, a full response team was on its way inside the bar, and strange quiet had settled over the destroyed room. The humans were catching their breath and checking their wounds. The aliens were trying to understand what had just happened to them. The smell of blood and broken alcohol filled the air, mixing with the metallic taste of fear and shock. Commander Ryan Hayes was the first through the door, followed by 6 security officers in full combat gear. They had expected to find a typical bar fight, maybe some drunk miners throwing punches over a card game. What they found instead made them stop and stare. The bar looked like a war zone. Tables and chairs were broken into pieces. Glass covered the floor like deadly snow. Green and blue alien blood was splattered across the walls and pooled on the floor. 12 aliens were wounded, some unconscious, others groaning in pain. And standing in the middle of it all were 7 humans, battered but victorious. Commander Hayes was human himself, a tall man with gray hair and scars on his face from his military days. He had been running security on Kepler Station for 10 years, and he had seen plenty of fights, but nothing like this. "What happened here?" Hayes asked, his voice cutting through the silence. Jake Murphy stepped forward, a broken bottle still in his hand. "These aliens decided they wanted to teach my customers some manners," he said calmly. "We taught them some manners back." Hayes looked around the room again, taking in the damage. 12 aliens down, 7 humans standing. "How is that possible?" Tony Rodriguez wiped blood from his face with the back of his hand. "They started it. We finished it." The security officers were staring at the scene with amazement. They were all human, and they understood what their species was capable of better than the aliens did. But even they were impressed by what they saw. Officer Sarah Johnson knelt beside Sktar, checking his pulse. The big Carvin was unconscious, but breathing. "This one has 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and multiple lacerations," she reported. "He will live, but he will be in the medical bay for weeks." Officer Mike Chen was examining the female Corvin who had fought Lisa Carter. "This one has a broken nose, fractured jaw, and what looks like internal bleeding. She needs surgery." One by one, the security officers checked the wounded aliens. The injuries were severe but not fatal. The humans had fought with enough control to avoid killing anyone, but they had made sure their opponents would not be getting up again any time. Soon, Commander Hayes walked over to the group of Zephyrian merchants who were still pressed against the back wall. Their crystal bodies were flashing with rapid colors, a sign of extreme distress in their species. "Did you see what happened?" Hayes asked them. The lead Zephyrian's voice was like wind chimes in a storm. "The humans went insane," he said. One moment they were peaceful traders, the next they were savage beasts. It was like watching civilized beings transform into wild animals. Hayes nodded and moved to the Thaxian diplomats. They were sitting in their corner booth, all 4 of their hands shaking as they tried to write reports on their devices. "And you?" Hayes asked. "What did you observe?" The senior Thaxian looked up with his large black eyes, and Hayes could see fear in them. "Real fear. We observed the complete failure of our understanding of human psychology," the alien said quietly. "Everything we thought we knew about your species is wrong." The other Thaxian stopped typing and spoke in a whisper. "We have been studying humans for 5 years. We thought we understood your behavioral patterns, your emotional responses, your capacity for violence. We were completely unprepared for this." Hayes walked back to the center of the room, where the humans were gathering around Jake Murphy. They looked tired but satisfied, like workers who had completed a difficult job. Pete Walker was cleaning, his broken glasses with a torn piece of cloth. Danny Moore was helping Carol Stevens sit down on one of the few unbroken chairs. Lisa Carter and Tony Rodriguez were checking each other for serious injuries. "Anyone need medical attention?" Hayes asked. "We are fine," Lisa said. "Just cuts and bruises." Carol Stevens laughed, a sound that made several aliens flinch. "I have not felt this good in years," she said. "It reminds me of the old days on Earth when things were simpler." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "What old days?" "Oh, you know," Carol said with a smile. "Before we got all civilized and polite. Sometimes it feels good to remember what we really are underneath all the fancy manners." Officer Johnson finished treating the wounded aliens and came over to Hayes. "Sir, we need to take statements and file reports. This is going to cause some serious diplomatic problems." Hayes nodded. He knew she was right. When word of this fight reached the alien homeworlds, there would be questions. Lots of questions. The aliens had always seen humans as junior partners in the galactic community, useful but harmless. This fight would change that perception completely. "Start with the security footage," Hayes told Johnson. "I want every angle recorded and saved. Then get statements from everyone who was here." As the security team began their investigation, the aliens started talking among themselves. The Zephyrians were clicking rapidly in their own language, their voices high and frightened. The Thaxians were whispering in urgent tones, occasionally pointing at the humans with their 4 hands, but it was the surviving Corvins who were the most disturbed. They were a warrior race, proud of their strength and fighting ability. They had ruled their part of space through force and intimidation for thousands of years. To be beaten by humans whom they had always considered weak prey animals was devastating. To their sense of identity, one of the wounded Corvins, a young male with green scales, struggled to sit up. He looked at Tony Rodriguez with something like respect in his yellow eyes. "How?" he asked in broken common tongue. "How you fight like that?" Tony looked down at the alien, still breathing hard from the fight. "We fight for each other," he said simply. "When one of us is threatened, all of us are threatened." The Corvan did not understand. In his culture, individuals fought for themselves or for their clan leaders. The idea of strangers fighting to protect other strangers made no sense to him. "But he pointed at Carol Stevens, she is old female, not warrior. Why she fight?" Carol Stevens heard the question and laughed again. "Because that young man," she pointed at Danny Moore, "reminded me of my grandson, and nobody hurts my family." "But he is not your family," the Corvan said, confused. "All humans are family when it matters," Carol replied. The alien stared at her for a long moment, then lay back down with a groan. He was beginning to understand something important about humans, something that his species had never grasped. Meanwhile, Officer Chun was reviewing the security footage on his portable device. What he saw made him whistle in amazement. "Commander, you need to see this," he called out. Hayes walked over and looked at the screen. The footage showed the entire fight from multiple angles. He watched as Tony Rodriguez went from peaceful negotiation to savage violence in the space of seconds. He saw Lisa Carter transform from a polite businesswoman into a warrior. He watched Pete Walker, a man who had probably never thrown a punch in his life, take down an alien twice his size. But what impressed Hayes the most was the coordination. The humans had not planned their attack, had not discussed strategy or tactics. They had simply reacted to threat with unified violence, each one instinctively knowing how to help the others. "Send copies of this footage to Earth Command," Hayes ordered. "They need to see what happened here." Officer Johnson finished taking statements from the aliens and came back to Hayes with a worried expression. "Sir, the alien witnesses are all saying the same thing. They are terrified of humans now. The Zephyrians are talking about canceling all trade agreements. The Faxians want to recommend military precautions against human expansion." Hayes nodded grimly. He had expected this. The aliens had lived in a galaxy where conflicts were resolved through careful diplomacy, economic pressure, and technological superiority. They had never encountered a species that would resort to primitive violence so quickly and effectively. "What about the Corvans?" Hayes asked. "That is the strange part," Johnson replied. "They seem to respect what happened here. They are not angry, they are impressed. Apparently, getting beaten in a fair fight is something they understand." Hayes looked around the destroyed bar one more time. In a few hours, repair crews would come and fix the damage. New tables and chairs would be brought in, the walls would be repainted, and the blood would be cleaned from the floor. But the memory of what happened here would last much longer. The aliens had learned something important about humans tonight. They had learned that beneath the polite exterior and peaceful words was something much older and more dangerous. They had learned that humans were not weak, they were just choosing to be civilized, and that choice could be revoked at any time. As the wounded aliens were carried out on stretchers and the humans gave their statements to security, word of the fight was already spreading through the station. Other aliens were hearing the story and beginning to ask questions about the species they thought they understood. 3 weeks had passed since the fight at Murphy's Bar, and the galaxy was still talking about it. The security footage had been copied and sent to every major alien government, analyzed by military experts and behavioral scientists across dozens of worlds. What they found disturbed them more than any weapon or technology humans had ever developed. On the Zephyrian homeworld of Crystal Prime, the Trade Council was meeting an emergency session. The chamber was filled with the musical chiming of worried voices, their crystal bodies flashing with nervous colors. High Trader Velshin stood at the center podium, her usually calm demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. "The humans cannot be trusted," she announced to the assembly. "Our trade agreements assume rational behavior, predictable responses to economic pressure. What we saw on Kepler Station proves that humans can become violent without warning." The Footage played again on the massive screens around the chamber. The council members watched in silence as Carol Stevens, a grandmother from Earth, methodically destroyed alien opponents with her purse and broken furniture. The sight never failed to shock them. Motion to suspend all trade contracts with human corporations, called out another council member. Until we understand this behavior, we cannot risk our citizens. The vote was unanimous. Within hours, Zephyrian ships were turning away from human space, carrying word that the Crystal People would no longer do business with the unpredictable humans on the Phaxian capital world of Mind's Rest. The situation was even more serious. The entire intelligence ministry had been called together to review their files on humanity. Director Kexthul stood before a room full of the galaxy's most sophisticated analysts, and for the first time in his long career, he had to admit complete failure. 40 years of study, he said, his four hands gesturing at the massive data displays around the room. 40 years of careful observation, psychological profiling, and behavioral analysis, all of it worthless. The displays showed chart after chart, graph after graph, all predicting human behavior based on logical models. None of them had predicted what happened at Murphy's Bar. We classified humans as emotionally unstable but physically weak, continued Director Kexthul. We assumed their emotions would make them easy to manipulate and control. We never considered that their emotions might make them more dangerous, not less. A junior analyst raised two of her hands. Director, should we recommend military preparations against human expansion? Kexthul was quiet for a long moment, watching the footage of Danny Moore, a 19-year-old freight handler, taking down a trained Thaxian diplomat with nothing but a metal tray and determination. Yes, he said finally. Issue a Class 7 threat assessment for humanity. Recommend that all border systems be reinforced and that no Thaxian citizen travel to human space without military escort. But it was on the Carvan war world of blood stone that the most interesting reaction was taking place. Instead of fear or anger, the Corvan military commanders were feeling something they had not experienced in centuries: respect. War Chief Graktar stood in the Combat Simulation Center, watching the bar fight footage for the 20th time. Around him, his top generals studied every move, every tactic, every moment of the human assault. Look at this, General Sekver pointed at the screen with one clawed finger. The female human, Lisa Carter. See how she uses improvised weapons? No formal training, but perfect instincts. And this one, another general added, pointing at Tony Rodriguez. He fights like our ancient warriors before we became civilized. Pure aggression, no hesitation, no mercy. War Chief Graktar nodded slowly. They fight like the old stories tell us we used to fight. Before we learned to rely on technology and formations and careful planning. What are your orders, War Chief? Asked General Sekver. Graktar was silent for a moment, watching Pete Walker, a mild accountant, break glass over an alien head with casual efficiency. Send word to the human government, he said finally. The Corvan Empire wishes to discuss. Military alliance? His generals stared at him in shock. The Corvans had never offered alliance to any species they considered weaker than themselves. War Chief, General Sekver said carefully, the humans have no significant military force. Their technology is inferior to ours. Why would we want them as allies? Graktar pointed at the screen where Carol Stevens was calmly fighting off two aliens at once. Because when the real war comes, I want these creatures fighting with us, not against us. Meanwhile, on Earth, the government was scrambling to deal with the diplomatic crisis. President Morrison sat in the Oval Office with his top advisors, watching reports flood in from across the galaxy. Trade agreements were being canceled, borders were being closed, and military buildups were beginning on a dozen alien worlds. How bad is it? Morrison asked his Secretary of State. Bad, Secretary Williams replied, shuffling through her papers. The Zephyrians have cut all trade. The Thaxians are treating us like a military threat. Half the minor species are refusing to meet with our diplomats. And the Corvans? That is the strange part. They want to sign a defense treaty. Apparently they were impressed by the fight. Morrison rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. So we have gone from being ignored to being feared, all because of a bar fight? Not just any bar fight, said Defense Secretary Adams. Sir, I have reviewed the footage myself. What those people did in that bar, the coordination, the effectiveness, the sheer willingness to engage in violence for strangers, it changes everything. How so? Adams leaned forward. Sir, every alien species we have encountered resolves conflicts through negotiation, economic pressure, or technological superiority. None of them understood that humans still carry the capacity for primitive violence just under the surface. They thought civilization had made us weak, and now they know better? Now they know that human civilization is a choice, not a limitation. And that makes us unpredictable in a way that terrifies them. Back on Kepler Station, Murphy's bar had reopened after 3 weeks of repairs. The new tables and chairs looked exactly like the old ones, and the walls had been repainted to cover the bloodstains. But everyone who entered could still feel the memory of violence hanging in the air. Jake Murphy stood behind his bar, polishing glasses and watching his customers. The mix was different now. Fewer aliens came in, and those who did were much more polite than before. They spoke quietly, paid their bills promptly, and never caused trouble. The humans, on the other hand, seemed more relaxed than ever. Word of the fight had spread through human space like wildfire, and every human freight hauler, miner, and trader who stopped at Kepler Station wanted to buy drinks for the heroes of Murphy's bar. Lisa, Carter, and Tony Rodriguez were at their usual table, going over shipping contracts. They had more business than ever before. Apparently, the reputation for being dangerous was good for business in some circles. Pete Walker was at the bar again, but now he sat straighter and spoke with more confidence. The quiet accountant had discovered something about himself in that fight, and it had changed him. Other humans treated him with new respect, and even alien clients seemed to listen more carefully when he spoke. Danny Moore was still cleaning tables, but now he moved with the easy confidence of someone who had proven himself. The teenage freight handler had become something of a legend among the younger humans on the station. Carol Stevens had returned to Earth, but not before giving several interviews to the galactic news networks. Her calm description of the fight, delivered in the tone of someone describing a neighborhood barbecue, had become one of the most viewed videos in the galaxy. The young people needed help, she had told the reporter. So I helped them. That is what humans do. The reporter, nervous Thaxion, had asked her if she would do it again. Carol had smiled, the same gentle smile she used with her grandchildren. Of course, dear, family takes care of family. Now, 3 weeks later, Jake Murphy watched his peaceful bar and thought about what had changed. The aliens saw humans differently now. They no longer dismissed them as weak or naive. But more importantly, humans were beginning to see themselves differently too. For generations, humanity had tried to fit into galactic civilization by being polite, reasonable, and peaceful. They had hidden their true nature behind diplomatic smiles and trade agreements. But the fight at Murphy's bar had reminded them of something important. Sometimes being civilized meant choosing not to use your full strength, not being unable to use it. A new customer entered the bar, a tall Zephyrian trader who moved carefully and spoke quietly when ordering his drink. He kept glancing at the humans in the room, as if expecting them to transform into wild beasts at any moment. Jake Murphy served the alien his drink and couldn't help but smile. The customer was probably harmless, just a nervous trader trying to make a living. But he treated the humans with the same careful respect he would show to dangerous predators, which Jake thought as he watched Tony Rodriguez laugh at something Lisa Carter had said was probably wise. Outside the bar, Kepler Station continued its business as usual. Ships docked and departed, cargo was loaded and unloaded, and deals were made in a dozen different languages. But underneath the normal routine, something fundamental had changed. The aliens now knew that humans were not the weak.